Just before dawn in May 1536, Anne Boleyn awoke in the Tower of London, knowing that her short walk across the green would end her life. The king who had once written her fervent love letters had summoned a master swordsman from France, believing a swift blade to be an act of mercy. That single morning has come to define Anne's story. But it should not. To understand how England reached that scaffold, we must rewind years earlier to ambition, belief, and a love affair that reshaped a kingdom. This is not merely a romance gone wrong. It is the story of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, two complex individuals whose desires collided with theology, dynastic fear, and political power. Their relationship sparked England's break with Rome, altered the course of the Reformation, and left a legacy still argued over 5 centuries later. Anne Boleyn, not an upstart, but a product of power. A persistent myth paints Anne as a social climber of humble origins. The truth is more nuanced. She was born into a well-connected, ambitious family rooted in Kent, with Hever Castle as her childhood home. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was a skilled diplomat who moved confidently within royal circles. Anne grew up educated, multilingual, and alert to the ways influence operated. What truly set Anne apart, however, was her continental upbringing. Sent abroad as a girl, she spent formative years in the Netherlands and then at the French court, serving Queen Claude of France. There, she absorbed Renaissance culture, music, fashion, conversation, and religious devotion shaped by humanist ideas. By the time she returned to England in her early 20s, Anne was neither provincial nor naive. She was cosmopolitan, observant, and acutely aware of how performance and intelligence could translate into power. Yet the surviving evidence also complicates her image. Among Anne's known possessions is a richly illuminated prayer book, filled with devotion and bearing her own handwritten inscription in French. The time will come. Whether prophetic or personal, it suggests a woman who believed destiny had a direction, even if she could not yet see its cost. Henry VIII, before the tyrant. History often remembers Henry as bloated, cruel, and paranoid. That portrait belongs to the final decade of his reign. The young Henry who first noticed Anne was something else entirely. Tall, athletic, handsome, and dazzlingly confident. Contemporary ambassadors described him as charismatic and generous, a king who laughed easily and excelled at sport, music, and conversation. He was also deeply conscious of his divine role. Henry believed kingship was a sacred trust bestowed by God, and that belief would become dangerous when combined with insecurity. Despite years of marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry faced a terrifying problem: no surviving male heir. In a brutal world of dynastic politics, a daughter alone seemed insufficient protection against foreign rivals and civil war. A marriage under judgment. Henry's marriage to Catherine had begun affectionately and endured for over 20 years, but repeated miscarriages and infant deaths haunted the union. Over time, Henry convinced himself that this was not chance, but punishment. Scripture offered him an explanation. In the book of Leviticus, a man who marries his brother's widow is warned that the union will be childless. Catherine had been married to Henry's elder brother, Arthur, who died young. The king's conscience, or perhaps his ambition, seized on this interpretation. If God opposed the marriage, then the Pope's earlier approval was irrelevant. What began as theological doubt soon hardened into obsession. Henry did not simply want a divorce. He wanted certainty, proof that God stood with him. Courtly love and a dangerous attraction. When Anne arrived at court in 1522 as a lady-in-waiting, she entered a world of spectacle and strategy. Tudor court life blurred the lines between romance and advancement. Kings flirted, nobles performed devotion. Desire could be a ladder. Henry already had mistresses, including Anne's sister Mary. That experience likely taught Anne a crucial lesson. Royal favor could be intoxicating and fleeting. When Henry turned his attention to Anne around 1526, she refused the expected role of compliant lover. Whether from principle, calculation, or both, Anne would not yield without marriage. This refusal transformed Henry's interest into fixation. His surviving letters, some playful, others intensely emotional, reveal a man undone by longing. He wrote of loneliness, impatience, and physical desire with startling candor. Far from a cold political maneuver, their relationship was deeply personal. Henry did not merely want Anne. He wanted her exclusively, as wife and queen. Love versus the world. Anne's silence in the historical record has often been misread as manipulation. In truth, restraint made sense. A pregnancy outside marriage would have destroyed Henry's case and Anne's reputation. Both understood the stakes. To proceed correctly was not prudishness, it was survival. As years passed without resolution from Rome, frustration mounted. The Pope, constrained by European politics, and Catherine's powerful nephew, Emperor Charles V, refused to grant an annulment. For the first time, Henry faced an authority he could not bend. The radical solution. The answer arrived not from Rome, but from radical ideas circulating in England. Reformist texts argued that kings derived authority directly from God, not the papacy. One book in particular impressed Henry so deeply that he reportedly declared it essential reading for rulers. Anne almost certainly introduced him to it. The implications were explosive. If the king was supreme head of the church in his realm, he no longer needed papal permission. What began as a private love affair became a constitutional revolution. Henry severed ties with Rome, dissolved monasteries, and declared himself head of the Church of England. This was not merely about Anne. But without Anne, it likely would not have happened. Marriage and triumph. By late 1532, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn had achieved what once seemed impossible. French support was secured, Rome had been defied, and the path to marriage was finally clear. Soon after returning to England, their long-delayed intimacy became reality, sealing a bond forged through 7 years of frustration, secrecy, and risk. In January 1533, they married in a private ceremony, fully aware that the legitimacy of their union rested not on papal approval, but on Henry's newly claimed authority over church and state. Anne was already pregnant, and for a brief, intoxicating moment, everything appeared to confirm that destiny was on their side. Love seemed rewarded, conscience satisfied, and divine favor assured. Anne's coronation later that year was lavish and deliberate. It was designed to silence doubt and broadcast permanence. This was not a mistress elevated by whim, but a crowned queen presented as the future mother of England's ruling line. Music, pageantry, and symbolism reinforced the message. A new era had begun, and at its center stood Anne Boleyn, triumphant at last. The promise and the fall. That promise unraveled with shocking speed. Anne's long-awaited child was not the son Henry had convinced himself God would provide, but a daughter, Elizabeth I. History would later crown that moment as one of destiny's great ironies, but in 1533 it was received with barely concealed disappointment. The pressure on Anne intensified immediately. Her value at court, her security, and even her survival were now bound to her ability to produce a male heir. Subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriage, each loss eroding Henry's patience and confidence. The passion that once fueled defiance hardened into resentment. Anne's sharp wit, political awareness, and refusal to retreat into obedient silence, qualities that had once captivated Henry, now provoked irritation and suspicion. Court factions, sensing vulnerability, turned against her. Old enemies resurfaced, new rivals whispered, and a climate of fear replaced celebration. When accusations of adultery, incest, and treason emerged, they moved with ruthless efficiency. Evidence was thin, witnesses unreliable, and verdicts predetermined. Anne was arrested, tried, and condemned in a matter of weeks. On the scaffold, she maintained her composure and innocence, facing death with dignity. The French executioner Henry had summoned struck once, and England's crowned queen was gone. Legacy beyond the scaffold. Anne Boleyn reigned for barely 3 years, yet her impact dwarfs that span. She changed England's religion, altered the monarchy's relationship with the church, and gave birth to Elizabeth I, one of the most consequential rulers in English history. Her story endures because it resists simplicity. Anne was neither a scheming seductress nor a passive victim. Henry was neither pure romantic nor mere tyrant, at least not yet. Together, they were catalysts, driven by love, fear, faith, and ambition in equal measure. Their tragedy lies not only in Anne's death, but in how a deeply human relationship became entangled with absolute power. When love and kingship collided, England was remade, and one woman paid the ultimate price. History loves to turn Henry and Anne into villains and victims, but the real story is sharper. A private obsession that rewired an entire kingdom and ended on a scaffold. And the wild part is, their ending didn't end anything. It launched Elizabeth's era and changed England forever. If you want to be smarter every day, like and subscribe.